what I'll say for the carrot is here, this one has 75 days until it's mature. Right now, the soil is warm. And if you think about it with the right protection and the right growing, you may be able to harvest these for your fall Thanksgiving or harvest dinner or Christmas dinner. So I know, well, what about frost? We'll get there, but there's ways to protect your plants and protect vegetables for you to get something to grow. And there's other seeds that are going to be only 30 or 50 days to maturity. And those might be some great vegetables for you to plant. So knowing your own climate and your own sun and shade patterns. Right now, the sun is moving from the northern sky down into the southern sky. So you might start to see the shadows getting longer as we go. So you might see where's the sun or the shade going to be for your particular garden or your plants. Also, what is your elevation? How cold is it going to get? How windy is it going to get? What are those frost protections that you might need to consider as you're planting those beds? And what is the first frost date in your area? Many of you might be getting close to experiencing the frost within the next 2 or 3 weeks. I know here in Albuquerque, our normal frost is usually mid-October. During Balloon Fiesta, we usually get a cold and then it warms up again. But what is that normal first frost date going to be? Kind of plan for that. Will it warm up again or will it stay cold? So knowing how that works, but also, are you an area that gets really cold at night and then warms up really hot in the afternoon? So what are those temperature swings that you're going to be playing with? And all of that will influence how your garden grows or where you may need to place your garden beds or how you may need to protect your plants as you're growing. So September 15th is usually the first frost date for Grants and Gallup, Raton and Springer. Here in Albuquerque, it's usually for the valley around October 5th to 10th. So really all throughout New Mexico, and depending on where you're at, the first frost date really ranges in quite a bit. Sometimes it could be a light frost, sometimes it could be a heavy frost, but all of those will have an impact on how you're going to plant your garden or what plants are going to survive or what you need to protect. So some people may choose not to plant anything, but you might need to clean up your garden. So fall is a good time to get rid of some of the dead plants or those diseased plants. Many of your tomatoes that are blooming right now, it's time to cut all of those flowers off the tomatoes because they're not going to set fruit and ripen well enough before we get close to that frost. So time to trim back many of those vines. Do you have corn stalks that you could use as deco? Do you need to maybe clean up some of the garden or even start to terminate your cover crop? Many of our soils tend to dry out, and when they dry out, they start to crust over and become hydrophobic. Hydrophobic means it is scared of water. Have you ever seen where soil beads up sometimes and just flows off? So if we let our soils dry out and crust over, it's hard to get those soils rehydrated. So we may need to mix it like a cake batter or mix it like concrete slightly just to get that water thoroughly mixed in. And then also maybe we may need to add some compost to bring more life back into our soil with the microbes, the mycorrhizae, the beneficial fungi. So make sure that you have enough water and moisture so that your soil stays healthy. Raised beds versus in-ground. I'm encouraging more people to go into a raised bed situation. One, because many people are having trouble bending over and planting into the ground. And also sometimes our soils may not be very active or producible, or we may just have hard rock. How can we grow on hard rock? The answer is maybe putting in a raised bed. And some of them can only be maybe 8 inches tall. Other ones might be 2 or 3 feet tall. And for those taller ones, then you don't have to bend over as much to garden all the way down to the ground. And if you make a raised bed with a seat bench or a lip all around, you can set your tools and your basket, or you can even sit on the side of your garden bed and work right into it. And for those taller beds, you do not have to fill it all the way up with soil. You can put some old straw or some twigs or branches, other material halfway up, and only maybe have 12 inches of compost and soil for actively growing. So there's ways to get your soil prepped and maybe even grow in raised beds so it's advantageous for you to grow those vegetables. If you're not going to plant vegetables, maybe keeping your soil alive with a fall and winter cover crop. Those that can take colder weather, such as a winter wheat or a rye. Sometimes people might put an Austrian winter pea or a daikon radish or turnips. They need about 6 weeks of good growth, so we may or may not have that in some of your areas, but give it a try. Or if you don't want to plant vegetables, maybe plant a cover crop. The thing is, don't let your soil be completely bare. Cover it with something, even if you're going to put straw or shredded leaves or manure. Keep the soil evenly moist so that the soil stays alive and it doesn't dry out and it's dead next spring. So keep your soils moist and alive throughout all of winter. For watering, if you are going to water, you still need to water during the winter. And the best meter for measuring that water and moisture is your finger. Just put your finger down into the ground, maybe scratch down. Is it moist 2 or 3 inches down? Or if you scrape off the top, is it dry underneath? So keep that in mind. You don't want to overwater your plants. They don't need as much water during the winter, but they still need to stay hydrated during the winter months. If you're using well water, and depending on what type of water you may have, you might have salinity issues. So just be careful about how much salt is in your water that you're putting on your plants. The more water that evaporates that has salt in it, you're going to leave a salty crust on top of things. So just be careful. Hopefully we get some good snow and we get some rain over the winter. If you are able to harvest some of that rainwater and that snow melt and save it so for it could go to good beneficial use in your garden or other places around in the landscape. Don't just let it run away, but for those dry times, see if you can save some water and use it for your garden later on. If you are going to water, utilizing an irrigation or a hose, make sure that you drain those hoses out of all the water. That way they don't freeze and crack on you and break your water lines later on. So what are some things that you can plant now? Now is a good time to start planting your spring flower bulbs, such as your tulips, your daffodils, your crocuses. I would suggest wrapping them in a metal wire basket to protect them from the moles and the gophers and the squirrels from eating it. But garlic, you can also plant here in late September into October. Middle October is a great time to plant that, maybe early October for where you are, depending on when the cold and the frost come. And all these other vegetables, you can have great opportunity. And I'm going to go through a few of these individually for you. So spring flowering bulbs. For those flowers that you want to bloom in March, April, and May, you need to get them into the ground in late September and early October. So your daffodils, your crocus, your hyacinths, irises, tulips, all of those early spring bulbs, they need enough chilling hours to bloom, and make sure you wrap them in some type of wire mesh to protect them from ground squirrels and other rodents that may like to eat on your bulbs. Garlic, NMSU has a great publication on garlic planting. If you're in some colder areas, the hard neck varieties are going to be your best varieties for planting. For most of you who are going to be in the colder climates, mid-September to early October. So now is a great time to get those garlic cloves set out into the garden. For those of you who might be in some warmer climates or on the margin, early to mid-October or mid-October to early November, depending on what your climate is for colder or warmer. They need to overwinter and they need cooler temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 centigrade. You want to plant them 1 to 3 inches deep and 4 to 6 inches apart. They prefer looser soil and not heavy clay. So you might need to work your soil a little bit to get the beds prepped. NMSU has a great publication, H-234, gives recommended varieties for your area, as well as the planting tips and bed prep on how to plant garlic correctly, as well as how to harvest it and when to know when it's ripe. Lettuce loves it when it's cool. It does not do well when it's hot, but it does not take the frost. These are some pictures of some lettuce that have some row cover over them. What you don't see is these were under a plastic hoop house, and these were growing in the midwinter. So you can grow a lot of the leaf lettuce varieties all winter long, provided it doesn't get too cold and the frost has direct contact with it. They mature 30 to 45 days after seeding, and you can get multiple harvests off of them. You can cut them and they'll grow back 2 or 3 times, maybe even 4 times in the cooler areas. They won't grow fast, but you can at least get multiple harvests over them. But they need protection from the direct cold when it gets too cold outside. Spinach is another crop that does really well in the cool area. You can start harvesting it 30 days after planting. If you're online looking at the garden catalogs or at a store, some of them will have a snowflake or a thermometer sign that has a blue symbol to it. Those are the varieties that you know are going to be cold tolerant with everything. And again, you can get multiple harvests over this. It does well with some protection from the direct cold. These do great in miniature hoop houses or in some cold frames to grow all winter long. Kale is another one. I enjoyed this when I was in Germany, where they the frost hit it before they actually harvest it. It might need a little bit longer to mature, 60 to 90 days, depending on the variety, but it germinates best in warm soils. So right now your soils are warm. So this is one that get out now. And then as it matures and as the season hits, the cool weather will concentrate the sugars and make the leaves nice and tender. And you can enjoy this as for many of your fall evening salads or dinners, or saute it later on. So this is a great, many of your cold crops or cabbage crops are wonderful for the winter season. Swiss chard is in the beet family. It's a close cousin to the beets. You want to sow it about 4 weeks before frost. So get it out now if you can. Hopefully the frost won't come too early for any of you this year. But if it does, just try to make sure it's protected from the frost. But Swiss chard really mellows out, has a lovely flavor when it's cooler out. In Albuquerque, we can grow Swiss chard outside without protection all winter long. Some of you may need to have it protected, but it does really, really, really well for the fall and winter seasons with everything. And it is one that's called cut and grow again or cut and come again, and it just keeps producing and producing. So Swiss chard is also very nutrient rich and dense, and it's just a great vegetable for us during the winter months. Radishes are another great fall crop. Some of them will ripen within 30 days and 50 days. As for those that get planted in the spring, when they ripen, when it's really warm outside, those that ripen in midsummer tend to be pithy and woody and spicy. But those that ripen in the fall are not as spicy and not as woody and pithy as, so I enjoy a fall planting of radish. They still have a little spice. Each variety is slightly different, but they don't have that prickiness and they don't have that woodiness that some of the other ones do. They will need some protection from the cold, but they're a great fall vegetable to be had, and you can still get them out and planted and enjoy. Peas may be questionable for some of you. Here in Albuquerque, we can do it. Farmington, you might be able to do some snow peas or snap peas. Some of the other places where it gets too cold, I'm not sure. The challenge for peas, they can take a light frost, which is great. They can take the cold if they're established, but here is where the but comes in. They need to be pollinated. This is the only cool season crop that needs to have a bee to pollinate it, or it needs you to take a paintbrush or a Q-tip or something to pollinate the flowers from one to one. So if you can grow some peas, I would give it a try. The pea tendrils and the new pea leaves might be good to eat as well, or the pea sprouts. But if you can get a harvest out, if you have some hoop houses that you can grow these in, it might be nice to try some peas, especially those sugar snap peas. I think those are really will taste well for you in the fall garden. Broccoli and cauliflower, if you have transplants, it might be too late to seed them, but if you have a hoop house or a covered garden, you might be able to grow them quite well. They do best here in the fall as well. They prefer it cool. They might need protection from the hard frost areas, but if you can set up some straw bales or set up some mini hoop houses, you might be able to get these through for the winter, and they do really well for the fall garden. Brussels sprouts are another great cabbage crop that grows well during the fall season. Some varieties are going to be more cold tolerant than others. You can sow them out mid to late summer, so maybe not this year, but next year, think about planting out Brussels sprouts, and then you'll have them ready for your fall Thanksgiving or Christmas tide dinner. They do tolerate the frost well, but not the deepest cold. And they do best in the mild winter. So you just have to know what your climate can support for your fall and winter gardening. Carrots and parsnips. Carrots are another one I really love in the fall garden. They are so buttery sweet, harvested in the fall. They germinate quickly. And then as the days cool off and the soil cools down, you can keep these out and store them in the ground a little bit longer than some of the other plants are. Just watch out so that no mice or other rodents are eating on your carrots. But they really ripen well during the fall season, and they just have a beautiful taste. They're not as pithy or woody as compared to the summer harvested carrots. So give them a try, and I hope you enjoy them. Beets, I also like for fall planting. They germinate really well in the warm soil, so get them out. They prefer ripening for the cool season. They also have deeper sugars and darker colors when they're ripened in the fall. So give them a try. And also, isn't it much cooler in your kitchen to pickle beets when it's only 50 degrees outside or 40 degrees outside as compared to midsummer? So keep that in mind, where you might want to stagger your plantings and maybe do some of your pickling later in the year for some of these other plants that do well for those cool seasons. It will benefit from a little bit of cold protection later on. So keep that in mind. It doesn't take the cold, but it can tolerate some coolness later on. Turnips are another one. This one's not one of my favorites, but I know some people enjoy the taste of it. Plant them again 6 weeks before frost. They germinate well in warm soils, and they're great in cooler weather crops, but they do need protection from the cold. Or if you want to plant this as a cover crop or feed it to your horses, this might be a nice crop for some fall feeding of your horses if you have them as with you. Kohlrabi is one of my favorites. I enjoy it. It's not one that many people know. It does germinate best in warm soils, but it ripens best in cool weather, and it can tolerate the light frost. This is in the same family as kale and cabbage, and is the stem that is what you eat. You can eat the leaves, they're okay, but the bulb of the stem you can slice up like an apple or jicama. You can eat it in a salad or pickle it, and it really does well in cool seasons when it ripens. Again, for the cold, it needs some protection, but you can get it through for part of the winter. One other one I didn't mention, if you're interested, bok choy is another one that does really well for the fall garden. And it can tell bok choy and tatsoi are both Asian greens that do really well with cold temperatures and can tolerate some of the harder freezes. So that might be something to try is bok choy or tatsoi later on. If you are going to do some fall and winter gardening, you might want to try some row cover. There's some different spun row covers of differing weights and gauges. Agribon 19 has some light frost protection, and the larger the number, the heavier the frost protection and protection from cold you'll get. If you are going to do some, if you want, there's also some plastics that you can use, some 6 gauge and some 8 gauge mil plastics, which helps to protect from the frost. What I would do is take some electric conduit that's UV rated and just put them over and around, and you can bend them in place, and then you can attach your row cover or even your plastic to that. But just remember, on those sunny days when it's 40 degrees outside or 50 degrees, you're going to have to open up those plastic or open up those tunnels somehow, because it can get easily 80 or 90 degrees underneath that plastic if you're not careful. So make sure you have good air circulation. Make sure you close it up at night, but you might need to protect your plants during those coldest of days. And plastic, the 6 mil plastic will be one benefit, and some of those row covers from Agribon might be some others. Cold frames is another one where you can maybe put some, build some raised beds, put some glass sheeting, and maybe protect it with some straw bales or some compost or from manure. Manure is a great heat source, but just be careful with some of the hay that you might have received. It may have been sprayed with residual herbicides, so just be careful that any manure that you're going to plant around with, make sure it doesn't contain any herbicides from the manure inside. Here we have one of our raised beds. You can see that looks like here it's maybe early March, just by looking at our trees in the back. But look at this beautiful kale. It's going to flower. It's bolting already. But we have to open it up during the day because it got too hot underneath because of the sun. So just make sure. Here we have our raised bed on door hinges, so that way we could open and close it relatively easily. Cold frames are another good thing that you can start your plants with. It helps to protect from early frost and late frost. You can get some other plants started in midwinter to get some early starts on many of your vegetables. And cool season vegetables will thrive even in a cold frame, even when freezing temperatures are outside. And here we have a picture of a cold frame. These are just some old windows. So if you go to Habitat for Humanity or a Reclaim store or something like that, or even if you have old windows in your backyard that are just sitting there, why not repurpose them? Maybe take some straw bales and spread them out the size of your windows and lay the windows on top. And that way you have a mini greenhouse. Here they have a wooden box frame. I might put some straw bales around that, or even mound it with compost or dirt to provide some insulation. But this is a great way to start gardening, or for the fall, or even in early spring and February, March, to get an early start for your growing season. So there's lots of stuff that you can do. So there's some low cost hoop house tunnels. There's some YouTube videos that you can watch about this. We also have some raised bed plans. The University of Maine has a great little plan that you can put together for the mini hoop houses or raised beds. We have some great extension publications from NMSU, but the one I find the best that I think may be the best one for you all up north and they're in around the Navajo country in Farmington is actually from Utah State Extension. They have a great planting the fall vegetable garden for high elevation. So I would highly recommend maybe getting online, and I can also send the links to Mikkel, so that way you all can receive some of these links and have further reading on the fall vegetable gardening. And so that's the end of my presentation. Are there any specific questions that you all may have for your specific garden that I might be able to help out with? Did I have kohlrabi in Germany? The answer is yes. And George, I worked with George later on. Um, but I did a 2-year, a year and a half long internship in Germany when I was studying. And I also visit family often in Germany. So yes, I had kohlrabi in Germany and that's where I got introduced to it. And it's just a lovely vegetable. And it's just one that I just try to encourage people to try. And I just want to encourage all of you to try something. I know some of you may have more challenges than other. And I know some of you may also want the soil to rest. And having the soil rest over the winter season is great as well. Just make sure your soil is protected over those winter months so it doesn't dry out and it doesn't die. So I know we still have some growing season left. So maybe try planting even lettuce or some short day carrots or something out there. So I think there'll be some great opportunities. How do you restore soil in the raised bed once it's dried out? And how often do you add more compost and how much? So it is for a raised bed. I like to refresh the soil every year. So I like to put about an inch of new compost every year or put down some cover crop and turn that in every year. You don't need to change out the whole garden bed, but you do need to add a little bit of compost, maybe about an inch, and get that worked in every year because you're always going to lose some amount of soil for your raised beds each year. So make sure you are amending your raised bed somewhat for that. Thank you, Margaret. And gardening, even during the fall or winter when it might be gray and overcast, that does help fill our spirits and hope for spring. But just seeing anything green out there is great. Also, I like to challenge people, why not grow your own holiday feast and have it ready for yourself? So that way you can share with your family and friends fresh produce and not have to go to the store. So that might be something to also encourage people that you can grow your own holiday dinner if you start and plan now. Can you grow a cover crop in a garden bed? The answer is yes. So growing a cover crop, whether it be some winter wheat, some clover, some vetch, just make sure that don't let it go to seed, but you want to get it turned under and put into your garden bed, especially for your vegetable garden bed or your annual flower beds. All of those would be great opportunities for the cover crop. Any tips on radishes? Mine always end up woody. The answer is fall planting, they don't end up as woody as when they ripen when it's really hot outside. And this past May, I'm not sure if, or the past couple years, we start off cold, 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 and then it turns really hot. And then our radishes are ripening when it's really overly hot outside. And that's really when you see your radishes, in my opinion, woody and bitter and pithy. Give it a try. It'll be interesting to see if they are still just as woody and pithy for you if you plant them in the fall. And maybe try different varieties. Compare the red globes versus the white icicles or the watermelon. See which ones are more woody or pithy or bitter. Is it better to amend in the fall or the spring? It depends on what you're wanting to grow and what your cycle is. If you're going to be planting right now, I would probably amend in midwinter and early spring to let it break down. If you're going to let it rest all winter, then I would put your amendments down in the fall. let all of that break down so that way the nutrients are available for your crops next spring. So it just depends on what is your intention for planting this fall, or are you going to wait, clean up your garden this fall, then put down your soil amendments, let them break down so that way they're available for your plants next spring. What do you recommend for a cover crop in the raised bed garden? Again, some of those winter wheats will do fine. Some of the micro clovers should do okay, as well as some of the small vetch. Any of those will be fine. If you wanted to plant some winter pea in there, such as the Austrian pea, those will do fine. Any cover crop mix of 3 or 4 different plants should be fine. If you're really having a hard time in hard soils or hard compact and clay soils that stick together, then I would recommend maybe putting in some tiller radishes or some fall turnips in, let them grow big. Daikon radishes do well. That will help to break up the soil, those heavy soils, and add tilth into your soil to break up that heavy clay. And those will all work well in a raised bed situation too. Other questions for me? Did I miss any questions already?
Hey, John, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Um, Compared to something like a greenhouse that you mentioned, how good is a root cellar? Is there certain vegetables that are better in a root cellar?
Hold up just a moment. So a root cellar is going to be good for storing your crops. So
Oh,
especially for a root cellar, it's good for storing your apples and your potatoes, your harvested carrots and beets. So all what a root cellar does, it helps to keep the temperature cold without freezing. And it really helps to store your crops all below ground. So that's what a root cellar is used for. And part of it is has it got its name. It likes to store your root crops, but as well as your apples and many of your fall harvested crops. And many people store their canned goods down there where it's dark and it's even temperature and it's good humidity, so stuff doesn't dry out. So that is what a root cellar is used for,
oh,
as compared to a hoop house or a greenhouse. A greenhouse is made normally of glass or hard plastic. A hoop house is made kind of that flexible plastic. Sometimes they can be heated just with solar. Some of them are heated with other materials such as propane or gasoline. What I've also seen some people do is get big jugs of water, let them absorb the heat during the day, and then protect the plants at night. And so hoop houses and greenhouses are used to grow the plants.
okay. Thank you for the clarification. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Are there any tips for using worms in a raised bed? So what I would say is wiggle worms, red wiggle worms, and earthworms are always beneficial because they help to aerate the soil naturally. And I think they're always a benefit in the raised bed situation. They will be great in compost. They help to break down parts of the soil and they help to make nutrients available for your plants. So I would say worms are always a great thing. Just be careful with the extreme cold because they don't survive. So you need to protect them from the extreme cold. And if you're going to harvest some red wigglers, maybe protect them over the winter in your compost bed or in a garbage bin or something buried into the ground. But you do need to protect the red wigglers and your earthworms. Make sure they're protected from the coldest of the years. But they are of great benefit to your garden, whether it's in the raised bed or in your soil. And do they need to be fed? The answer is yes. But so long as so in the compost situation, you're going to be feeding them all the time. If they're in your raised bed situation, so long as they have plant debris and compost to feed on, you should be fine to work with them. Let's see. Did I miss anything else here? Whoops. Let's see here. Are there any other questions for me for the fall garden?
Hey,
If not,
John, this is
thank you
Shirley.
all.
Hey, John,
Yes,
this is Shirley. I just wanted to let everybody know that we have the polls up for the presentation that was for the fall gardening tips. We would appreciate it if they would fill out the polls and turn it in.
and the last tip I'll give you is reach out to some of your local extension specialists in your area. So there might be some, and as well as some of your elders and other gardeners who may have experience during winter gardening, and ask them tips and see how you can adapt to your garden. Every place is going to be different, but give it a try, but also ask and share that knowledge around in your communities as well. And I just hope to inspire that you can grow something and grow healthy foods throughout the fall and winter months. Can tulips be planted in pots? The answer is yes. Just make sure they're protected from the squirrels, but you may need to chill them in your refrigerator before putting them in pots and setting them outside.
Does anybody have any more questions for John? If
This was
not,
wonderful. Thank you.
Before everybody heads out, I'd like to share some upcoming events. If John, if you're done, if not, please proceed.
Nope, I'm done.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and show the upcoming events that are hosted by our Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Program. So I'm going to share my screen. So for September 19th, we have our water bath canning salsas and other tomato products workshop, which is held in the Nanahinzad Chapter House in Fruitland, New Mexico. That's going to be on September 19th. It's going to be at the Nanahinzad Chapter House from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. if you're in the area and would like to join us. Next is coming up on October 2nd. So the canning workshop is an in-person workshop, just to clarify. The New Mexico Livestock Board Update and Services webinar, that's going to be online. That's going to be October 2nd, 2024, 5:30 to 6:30 at a usual time. It's hosted by Brian Murphy, who's the New Mexico Land Board McKinley County Inspector. Please head to our website to register. And the next one, October 9th, is going to be it's going to be understanding the basic external and internal parasite control in sheep. I didn't change the heading. It's going to be 5:30 to 6:30 on October 9th. And the presenter is going to be Chad Page. He's a sheep and goat specialist from Utah State University. And we all like you to register and attend if you're interested. And again, we are a conservation planning program. Again, we're the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, and we also work in collaboration with USDA, with Diné College Land Grant Office, and COPE, the Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. And just want to thank Mr. John Garlish again. We appreciate you presenting, taking the time out, and that is it for this evening.
You're welcome.